So this is the homepage of the Wise Democracy uh, project, and it gives, first of all, a purpose. Wise Democracy Project exists to help us envision and co-create a deeply participatory culture that generates policies and activities that support the long-term quality of life. That's the purpose, and there's an underlying dynamic. We seek to evoke and engage the wisdom and resourcefulness of the whole on behalf of the whole. Now, the whole can be the whole community, the whole country, the whole situation, the whole world. There's all sorts of ways to apply the whole, but this is the thing that every part of this website is a window into trying to do this. And I'm trying to introduce people to that idea. And our primary tool is the Wise Democracy Pattern Language. And it highlights dynamic factors and design principles which can make an activity, organization, or community more wisely self-governing. And it's based on hundreds of real-life innovations. It's an evolving database of wise democracy patterns that helps us understand, reimagine, and transform the ways we manage our shared world. So this is an effort to, this short thing is an effort to articulate what's going on in this whole thing. And I'm interested in people who resonate with those. And they are in all different sectors and activities. And this is my effort to hook them and have them say, oh, this is interesting. And we have two videos here on the home page. And I'm going to actually play the first one, which is very short, just a couple of minutes long. And then I'll show you the other one. But this one is the fundamental theory behind the wise democracy.
The evolution of a wiser democracy involves redefining and expanding three dimensions of democracy. The first dimension is power. We want power to be more collaborative and interactive. This leads us to the second dimension, participation. We want participation that takes us beyond voting, lobbying, and activism. Participation that involves more players in co-creating the larger life we all share. And last, and most important, we want the outcomes of our participatory power to be wise, to deeply benefit all life over the long term. These three dimensions don't overlap much now, but by supporting innovations where they do overlap, they grow until they all become manifestations of one thing, one deeply participatory culture, one wise democracy. The ideas, guidelines, and resources on this site are readily applicable at all levels and domains of self-governance, both actual and envisioned. We encourage you to apply these gifts to your family, your group, your project or organization, your community, your country, and to work together to make it real everywhere.
So a sort of underlying thing here is that these three things, the power, usually democracy is spoken of in terms of power, how to distribute power, abuses of power, all that kind of stuff. And then participation, more and more people are talking about making sure people have a voice. It's like 95 or more % of commentaries on democracy cover power and participation in one way or another. And very few of them cover wisdom, cover the outcomes, the nature of the outcomes. So that's just letting you know that this is the fundamental, again, behind everything. The other is a description. This is an interview that Andy Pace, who's a colleague in the UK, did with me, a section of that, where I talk about this further. And that's brief also, but it's stressing the fact that it's based on things which already exist. It's not totally imaginary. And so is this for real? These are a bunch of little things that can, open up. It's like a frequently asked questions, a FAQ. And I go, is this real? Yes, it is. It's based on things that are already going on. It just creates a larger context for it. Who is this for? Anybody who's really interested in what this has to say and is frustrated with the options they have presented to them. What is it good for? I describe. What does it cover? I describe. What do you mean by wisdom? wisdom in this frame is the ability to understand or take into account what needs to be taken into account for long-term broad benefit. There's many different ways to apply that, all of which are appropriate. So it's a definition that is actually a space for inquiry, and that's the kind of wisdom I'm talking about. And the 3D is those three dimensions: power, participation, and wisdom. And pattern language, many of you already know what this is, but it's an interrelated set of design principles. We're talking about how would we design a wise democracy if we were going about it. And we can do that in many small ways and many big ways. And that's the set of design principles is the pattern language. And how can I explore all this? Well, dig into the website. And key assumptions we're facing, you click, put your cursor over it and it turns it around. We're facing major problems, potentially extinction level issues, and we aren't handling them very well. And there are lots of things that already exist to help us deal with them. So here's a framework for helping us choose strategically which ones we should do and where improvement is needed. And we need lots of different people to help us do that, for us to think together. So those are the three key assumptions that the project is based on. And then we have here a bunch of key concepts, and these things are very brief. There's a brief definition of pattern and a link to a more detailed definition. So that's true of all these. These are all different concepts which are used over and over and over again in the pattern language or in the website. And this section is different portals, depending on who you are. We surveyed this website on lots of different people as it was being created, and different people wanted different ways to access this information. So this is a guide to those different ways, because there's lots of them. So if you want to explore wise democracy theory, and if that's where you want to start, and these things also are reflected, we're basically describing what some of these drop-down menus are at the top, as if they are portals into this whole thing. So here's one, and these are the same links. If you click here, you're going to end up in the Wise Democracy overview section. So getting started on the pattern, we have a alphabetical list of all the patterns. There's 70 patterns. If you'd like to address a few check a few key ones out, which we'll do, the starter list, 6 patterns that are particularly connected to other patterns. View the patterns in a bigger context. We have categorized them, so you can look at the patterns in each category. We have the Venn diagram, that's the three overlapping circles of power, participation, and wisdom. We have that with all the patterns located appropriately in that chart. And we also have looked at challenges, dysfunctions that the society has, that we have in our groups and organizations and even in our own minds, and listing those challenges, a set of challenges, and then here's a set of patterns that address those challenges. We'll look at all these things later on as we go through the drop-down menus. And all of these patterns have cards. So some people don't want to just see the names of the patterns. They want to actually see pictures. They want the whole experience of words and pictures. And so looking at the cards can do that. And we have places where you can look at the cards. There's more and more of those places being created on the website called portfolio views, and we'll look at one of them. And you can actually download the whole set of cards for free and cut them up. They're four per page, and cut them up and have your own deck to play with if you want. And then, how to use the pattern language to explore and evaluate democratic practices. We have a list of activities that you can do with the cards, and we also have an example of looking at a thing that is done in Austria, just to show you this, because lots of people like to ground themselves in this. There's an application called Civic Councils, of gathering a bunch of randomly selected people to deal with an issue and learn about it and come up with recommendations about it. And they're doing that in a state or district in Austria called Vorarlberg. And this thing describes that, what they do, and then it looks at what it does and its strengths in terms of the patterns. Each one of these links in red is a pattern. And so this is looking at that innovation through the eyes of the pattern language. And then we look at things that if they wanted to improve it, here are other dimensions they could improve it with. So these are other patterns. And then I compare that with public hearings, which in the United States is what I'm oriented to. And I describe what a public hearing is like in the United States. And here are the strengths of a public hearing. It's a much less sophisticated version of wise democracy than a wisdom council or civic council in Austria, but it's still much better than many other countries have. And then here are limitations. So these are examples of how to do that, and you can do that with your own whatever institutions you have or plans you have for your community or whatever. Particularly using the cards, a group of people can analyze a situation that they're involved with using the cards, using the patterns, and see what its strengths are, see things that could be supported, things that you want to focus on. So back to the home page, zooming down, and then we have at the bottom, exploring pattern languages in general. This pattern language was my creation, but it's in a tradition of many other pattern languages. And so I give some other pattern languages that are relevant to what we're doing here. There's a pattern language for group process. There's a pattern language for a sustainable economy. There's the original pattern language on community planning, on architecture. So I list those there for people to see the context. And then we have a donations page. We would love to have people contribute to this effort. And we also say, how to tell what feels right. It's because we don't recommend a particular kind of donation. And then there's testimonials from different people who think this is a great idea. And at the bottom of every page in the website is a comment section. And we are counting on people to use that comment section because we are ultimately going to do a version 2 of this. And for the time being, people have comments on the way it's presented or on a particular pattern or new patterns they want. This is the space to do it in. So we're going to go to the theory section now. That's all on the home page. And the theory section looks at the nature of power, the nature of participation, the nature of wisdom. The introductory page provides an overview, this is very much like the video that you saw. And then here's the Venn diagram that has all the patterns on it. And here's the video that you saw. And another general frame of reference for what is wisdom, and in this case, it's like, don't do things like bias and conformity and corruption. Don't do things that'll generate collective stupidity and folly. That's the first rule. The second rule is use anything that you know of, like quality of information, consideration of diverse perspectives, systems thinking, that can help you be more intelligent and wise together. And then take action on that. And then know that whatever you do, you're going to miss something. Taking into account what needs to be taken into account, you're going to miss something. So reality is going to tell you what you missed. So pay attention to what reality tells you. So that's the overall theory. And then we look at each of them, the nature of power in a wise democracy. And we have essays on that. There's a general essay at the beginning. And then a set of essays, the problematic character of power over, which is useful, but watch out. Traditional approaches to democratic power. This is bridging over into power in a democracy, and then modes of power. And I want to look at the modes of power thing just to show you the depth at which some of this goes into. Uh, and we look at, here's power over, all these different forms of power over that manifest. Then there's consensual power over, where you like servant leadership, delegation, accountability, where there's power over, but there's consent of the governed involved. And then non-consensual power over dynamics. And then power against, this is the more competitive, you know, somebody's trying to win over somebody else rather than just dominate. And then there's suasive force. Gandhi uses it's like the persuasive. This is a form of power over. We're not just working together. We want you to come over onto our side. But there's a form of force here, but it is a nonviolent force. So that's clarified. And then the power with, collective power family has power from among, networking, relationship. These things generate more power. It's like a synergistic, more power among the people involved, but it arises from their interactions. Power with is more, we're all focused together. It's like these guys with their all rowing together. We're going to all together focus on this. And power from within is, spirit, skill, all the characteristics of an individual or a group gives you power from within. You can develop all those. And power from without, servant leadership, support, facilitation. This is bringing more power into the situation, into the people that are involved. And then there's this totally unacknowledged form of power. The people who didn't vote helped create the outcome of the election. They're definitely forms of power because they cause things to happen. And it's like, if you collaborate with the powers that be and go about your business and let them do their work. I mean, you can see all the different kinds of power that are tangled up in that, but it is power, and getting used to thinking in these different ways and not just thinking power is influence and control. There's much more going on in there. So that's an example of the kind of depth. And then additional resources, there's more articles and links under that. And then, let's see, back. So then we have nature of participation in a wise democracy. And we have a series of essays here. What does it mean for the whole to participate? I have a thing here of, we're trying to access the wisdom and power of the power of the participation and the wisdom of the whole, of, by, and for the whole. So we look at, what does it mean for the whole to participate, and what does public engagement look like now? And then looking at Athens. Athens was, oddly enough, a really interesting example. There's a very restricted definition of citizenship because it was just, people who had Athenian ancestry. Men who had Athenian ancestry were who were citizens. But those citizens, practically everything was run by randomly selected citizens. The jobs in the government, you got a job in the government by being picked for it. So it's like, and people usually had one or two government jobs during their lives, and the recommendations for the what was voted on in the assembly. Most of us know about the assembly. Most of what was voted on came from this group of randomly selected 500 citizens who served for a year, developing recommendations and doing other jobs for the community. The level of participation of the whole, given that the citizens, we could define citizen more broadly and then give them that kind of power. But it's a really interesting example to explore. And then additional resources again. So each one of these, the nature of wisdom in a wise democracy, each one of these has theoretical materials in it. Sources of wisdom, wisdom missing from democracy, bringing wisdom to democracy, and additional resources. The sources of wisdom go quickly over. Uh, if you have a diverse group of people and bring them together in high quality dialogue, whatever they come up with has a wisdom that is derived from their diversity. There's more ground being covered by their diversity. You Both of these are essential to get the wisdom. You can have diversity and have poor communication interaction, and you don't get wisdom. You can have high quality dialogue with inadequate diversity and not get the wisdom. The holistic and system sciences, chaos, complexity, ecology, these things cover broader senses. It's not just mechanical cause effect. It's much more, understanding fields and the complexity of things. Spiritual and wisdom traditions, particularly those things that are common, broadly common, like the Golden Rule. We don't want something that just one branch of all the spiritual traditions has come up with, particularly if we're working in a democratic sense. But practically everybody has some, treat each other the way you want to be treated kind of thing. And there's wisdom there. What if we had a Golden Rule foreign policy? That would make a big difference in how the U.S. operates, at least. Multiple intelligences, logic and facts and reason, but also intuition, emotional intelligence, narrative intelligence, body, spiritual, all these other ways we have of knowing and engaging the world. How many of those can we bring into play and integrate? And seeing into deep time and scale, how small, how can we get down into, like, do we understand microbes on how they work? If we don't, there's certain things we can't handle, we can't take into account. Do we understand what impact there's going to be on the seventh generation after us? If we don't, there's certain things we can't understand. Looking far back in time and forward in time, looking at large scales and small scales, getting out of being focused on what's right in front of our faces, which is usually only a teeny piece of what's going on. Truly inclusive approaches. This refers, in a sense, back to the original one with the diversity and quality dialogue. If you can get people talking together who are very different and have them all agree, they all see the sense of a particular way of doing something, that's much better than a majority overruling the minority. So the more inclusive the thing you finally come up with, the more wisdom there is likely to be in it. And the energy of positive possibility. I have a friend who looks at journalism, and she says we need possibility journalism. At the end of every journalistic interview should be the question, what is possible now? After you have the who, what, when, what is possible now? Always thinking, given whatever the situation is, there are possibilities, both negative and positive, but really focusing on the positive and saying, what could we do that's good and useful with what we have in front of our noses? Personal authenticity and wisdom, to the extent that you can get wise people. Wise people are not a requirement, but the more wise people you have, if you have them in good process, the better off you're going to be, because wise people can argue and all the rest. Authenticity is like, are you being true? Are you being open? Is what you have to offer and what your experience is accessible? Let's be real here. And conscious learning and flexibility. This is that last thing that I covered in my the wisdom model of, be flexible enough to, face what reality's telling you, because you're always going to miss something. So this is the last piece. Always is make sure that you're willing to pick up the pieces of what you missed and learn, change your experience. So this is a really quick review of the kinds of things that are covered in this theory, 3D Wise Democracy theory section. And here are the patterns. And we have, again, you see the same list of things that we covered a little earlier. And I'm going to go into some of them. We also, some of the things that weren't in the original thing, the nature of the pattern language, what's going on with this pattern language, knowing that it was created largely by one person, me, and that's a limitation. And I am largely focused in a US understanding of things and in the way things work, and European, Western, Northern Hemisphere, whatever, those kinds of limitations. So the need to have a community of practice of people to work with this, bring their perspectives, is very important. And I make that quite explicit in that section. New patterns being explored. There are a dozen new patterns that are listed there that are not part of the overall pattern language. We had to stop somewhere. We stopped at 70. There's more coming on, and I keep discovering more pieces that aren't covered the more people I talk to. So hopefully in a year or two, there'll be a version 2 that will come out, that there'll be dozens of people involved in co-creating it, and it will still have the same core. And as I said, you can download it. But I'm going to take you on a particular trip into the starter set, just to take a look. The starter set is done because it's very confrontable. And yeah, so we have these 7 patterns are more connected to the rest of the set than any of the other patterns. Most particularly these top 2. And you see here, you see the list of the list of links, and then you see the card. And this is an example of the portfolio view. And you have each of these, you can go see each of these cards. And you can feel how having the pictures there are much. So this is a complete set. You can go down and see them all. And each card has the name and a picture. Went into getting each one of these pictures. And then what we call a heart, which is around 50 words, give or take 4 or 5, to describe, because it has to fit on the card, to describe what's going on with this pattern, why is it special. And then at the bottom we have related patterns. Each pattern has 7 patterns that have been chosen as significantly related. They're not the related, there's many others that could be chosen also, but they're definitely connected and allow you to explore further. And there is a little link to a full page on it. Here we have systems thinking, and this is the most potent pattern in the whole set, the most linked to everything else. So we're going to go to its page to explore. And yeah, I could click here, but it's going to take me to a different page. So I have, ahead of time, I have selected this. This is what its page looks like. And you see the title and the picture and these things which are on the card, and a picture of the card. And when we did these cards, when we did these patterns, I chose the pattern names, and then I wrote the heart. Here we have sameness makes everything seem dependable and secure. In contrast, diversity and disturbance introduce unpredictability and discomfort. So to enrich life and better navigate complexity and change, welcome and engage diversity and disturbance as signals that something needs to be looked at, stimulants for thinking, getting out of your box, resources for deeper insight into what's developing beneath the surface and what's needed to address it. So that's the essence of what's going on in the card, and every heart has a so in the middle of it, telling us this is sort of a situation that's going on, and here are some very loose guidances. And then there are resources. Every page of all 70 patterns have resources to help you use this pattern. And they're all linked to things. There are examples, there are essays, there's a movie, there's all different kinds of things in each one of these. And one of the innovations that's in this pattern language that isn't in others is this heart. When I was the the guy I was working with, Martin Rausch, to whom we have to thank for all of the beauty of the content is mine, but the beauty and arrangement of this site is Martin's creation. We worked for 9 months together, and this is what came out. And we're on Zoom talking about this, and we're discussing a pattern. And he says, "Tell me why you described it this way in the heart." And then he videoed me talking about it. So every one of these patterns has a little video of me talking about why I described it that way. And then he transcribed the video, and I edited the video. And every now and then, some of them have more stuff in it, but it's, directly transcribing. It's what somebody says, not necessarily readable. So it was edited both for readability and are there other things I wanted to add. So there's a whole essay on each one of these. And then there's space for, adding thoughts, adding more resources to this site. So, and we invite people's comments. So that's what's going on with every single one of these. Well-utilized life energy. This is a compliment. I was stumbled into this and realized that these two are two sides of the same coin. Well-utilized life energy. If you welcome life energy, everybody's diverse life energy, you're going to get diversity and disturbance. You need to know how to use it in order to to take what needs to be taken into account and get access the resources of the whole, etc. You need to know how to utilize the life energy that comes out when you invite it out, and that's where the using diversity and disturbance creatively. Once you have life energy come out, you need to use this. So this is an example of how these things are tied together. So we're going to go look at the patterns by name, just so you can quickly see. Here are all 70 patterns listed alphabetically, and they're numbered alphabetically. And they're all tied up with each other in various ways. They all operate at different levels of system and different dimensions of all this. All of them, every single one, is a window onto evoking and engaging the wisdom and resourcefulness of the whole on behalf of the whole. These are all different ways of doing that, and that's something I would love for people who use the pattern language to track in their own work with this, to realize that that's what they're doing, because any new patterns that are suggested and incorporated need to do that. They need to provide that access. And there is this is a page that has the entire, that list, the link that was on that, the patterns by name has a portfolio view, and if you click on that, it takes me to another page that you can't see, so I set it up ahead of time. So every single card in the set is on this page, and every single one of them has a link. So you can print out all of them and then do a bunch of exercises, play around with them, just learn what's there, or just study them. So I just want to introduce you to the visual beauty and the level of complexity, accessible complexity, because each one of these has their own page, and you can see them at various deep levels and various shallow levels. And the patterns by category, I'm not going to go to the portfolio view. You now know what that looks like, but each one of these, you could open up a category. Here's intelligence factors. Intelligence is how we maintain a semblance of understanding and appropriate engagement with relevant realities and energies present in our complex changing world. So tap into intelligence that is more than individual rationality. Work with any diverse cognitive capacities that can help us generate collective wisdom. So this is a category, And all the cards have this yellow that have to do with intelligence, have that little symbol in the corner of them that is yellow. And there's special category cards that replicate what's here. So here's your different kinds of intelligence patterns. And then there's general wisdom generating factors, power factors, sustainability factors, general cultural factors, wise democratic institutional principles, group dynamics and practices, and collaborative culture and individual capacity. So each one of these has a list of patterns under it. And so that's the category, the way it's sorted into categories. And then we have this other kind of category, which lots of people find even more useful. So and they have a lot of parallels to the other categories. They're not totally the same. There's 9 of the categories, and there's 5 of these things. But intelligence degrading factors: narrow short-term over rationalistic thinking, narrow short-term over personalized viewing, sloppy jumping to conclusions, conformist in-the-box thinking, inability to learn or benefit from challenges, unduly limited or biased information, deception. So here we have a bunch of patterns that speak to that. And this has portfolio views for all of these. So you can go and see the actual cards as well for this. We have folly generating factors, unsustainability factors, power corrupting factors, and cultural dysfunctions, hyper individualism, nobody listening, carelessness, and again, the patterns that will address that. So that's what the challenges this pattern language seeks to address, and the portfolio view for that. And let's see, this is the related patterns. Oh, this is let's see, is that going to take me? Yeah, it takes me there. Great. So here is, for each pattern, you can click on a pattern and see here is all concerns addressed, and here are the patterns that are related to all concerns addressed in a portfolio view. So that's that one. And then there is a, here it is. Then there's the related patterns interactive, which is a map. And Charlie, who's on the call, generated this map. So we have each pattern and its relationship, how many other patterns it's related to, or which.
Sorry, I have to give credit. It's Robert Best who put that.
Oh, he did this one? Okay.
Yeah.
So this Robert Best, Robert Best created this one, but he also linked us to this other one. And this has potential for the community of practice to have a real adventure, because this map, which is like that other map, is totally interactive. You can click on one and it gives you a page about that pattern. And ultimately, I understand that if you get the paid for version of this thing, it will give you a space where you can talk about that pattern, a wiki-like space. If you click on a line, it'll show you this link between these two, and you can talk about that link. It's kind of mind-boggling, the kind of data that is possible to gather together in this. So that is that. The related patterns interactive is that. Patterns located in the Venn diagram looks like this. It's not interactive. You can't get to one by clicking on it. We're trying to figure out how to do that, but you can see where it is in relationship to the other ones in the context of these. Examples using the Wise Democracy pattern language, that's the Austria Wisdom Councils and public hearings thing that I showed you. Using the patterns is here are exercises to do, which also show up in activities. We'll look at them in the activities links. Nature of this pattern language I told you about. Patterns being explored. Do a quick look at them. So here are these patterns, and you click on them and they open up into whatever has been developed on it so far. So, and we have added, since the site went up, we've added 5 to this list. So it's an ongoing, evolving list. And then we have download the complete set. And this thing, unfortunately, they've not been able to fix this so far. Many people this doesn't happen to. This thing doesn't slide over this way. But you can download it in the US version or European version in terms of paper size and layout. And this tells you what's inside that set, and then there are associated documents. You can get both of these things and use them however you wish. We have very open rules. The photographs are copyrighted by the people who did the photographs, so you don't have free use of the photographs. You have to pay for that. But all the other content on the site is open. Share as you wish. So this other pattern languages, we have definitions. This talks about pattern, what a pattern is, what a pattern language is, and then our definitions, more extensive definitions of those, which are so often used on the site. And then here are standards. If you want to design a pattern, it should have these characteristics in it. And all our patterns that we have now have most, not necessarily every pattern has all, but most of the patterns have quite a number of these in it. So this is a guide for people who are going to be creating the version 2.0. History of the pattern language. This is Christopher Alexander, who did the original pattern language. It's a video of one of his colleagues talking about it. So there's theory here, his theory, which overlaps with ours, but is not quite the same. And other pattern languages, all this beautiful setup, the imagery and all this is, again, Martin's work. So you have Christopher Alexander, Eco Trust Sustainable Economy 1, the Liberating Voices pattern language, and group works. And I have the Eco Trust pattern language here called Reliable Prosperity. It's now in the wiki, in the Internet Archive. It is not generally available in its old place. You have to go onto the archive to get it, but I have put it here so people can explore it. Christopher Alexander worked with these people this group called Eco Trust in Portland, Oregon, to develop this one. So it's interesting it exists, and here's all the patterns listed. They have an oversimplified map, hierarchical map here, the links within them. Each one of these, I don't know if this will take me to that page or not. We'll see. Yeah, it does. Okay. So you can see within their description of the dynamics of this human scale neighborhoods pattern, they have related patterns embedded. So that's their approach to using it. And they innovated like case studies and other resources, references, organizations. So this is similar to what we have in our pattern language in terms of references that are useful, organized somewhat differently. And group works, this is group process, overlaps a lot. I'm in the process of analyzing the ways this overlaps with ours, but this is good group process, enjoyable, productive. It's not necessarily focused on wisdom. And you can apply the Wise Democracy pattern language to group process, but it has a lot of other aspects. The patterns by name, just to see a list again, they have 91 patterns. some of which are identical to ours, and most of which are different. Like they have story, power of story is ours, very, very similar. But they have lots of exercises to do to use them, and you can download them and print them out yourself, or you can buy printed decks. We're still working on how to do printed decks. And this is the activities section. This is the overview of the next of these drop-down menus for us. And we have events, and you guys know the events section because you came here. You also know the newsletter section because you're subscribers to the newsletter. And community of practice is that we can't do this by ourselves. It requires a community of people for whom this is important and who see their work as part of this, because part of what, like nothing, there's nothing in this pattern language which is totally out of my head. These are patterns that I have seen in things that already exist, and things that implies. So this is in fact a space, an intellectual and visionary space within which everybody, not everybody, but the vast majority of people who are doing something good for the world can find their work in this context and have it have a larger meaning if the idea of a pattern language, an idea of a wise democracy is something that is of compelling interest to them as a vision. Once they understand accessing the wisdom and resources of the whole on behalf of the whole, they go, wow, I would love for my work to be part of that. Then this provides a context within which they can find where their work fits in the pattern language, the 7 patterns or whatever that their work particularly features. Related patterns to them suggest other things they could attend to, other people they could connect to. You know, teaching, you could create a whole curriculum out of this in terms of, you know, what your major is, the pattern, the main patterns you want to major in, and then the related patterns are your minor, and the whole thing is your general education. There's all sorts of things to do with this, but it is kind of social DNA with a directionality to it. These are designed, DNA as a design structure, and it needs to evolve depending on circumstances. So having more people involved actually using it and changing it without losing the essence of what it's all about is my dream of the community of practice. I don't know what other way to have this manifest in the world in its best possible way. So, yeah, how to participate coming soon. So the other using the patterns has these, you know, different things. There's practical applications, how to use it to deal with a specific project that you're working on or something that you're facing. Learning games, how to use the cards and the patterns to learn more deeply what's going on with this pattern language. And if you want to, like in your community, you want to have a wiser democracy in your community, what should you focus on? Here are exercises to, you know, help you think about that. And this is community building among people who are involved in this project, how to learn more about each other and how to draw other people into this activity. That's what all these activities are about. And then there's the newsletter, you know about that. All the newsletters are posted once the activities for subscribers only have happened. These are the newsletters, the actual newsletters. Then we post the newsletter itself. I'm using subscription to the newsletter as a very loose example of what somebody who's a member of the community practice is. There's more intense definitions of who would be in a community of practice. But if you subscribe to the newsletter, that's minimal. So I want to keep the activities. Once a month, there will be an activity that's open to everybody, and then once a month there'll be activity that's open just to subscribers to the newsletter. And I want to keep that, so I don't post the newsletter till after those activities happen. But you can look at any of the newsletters, the past newsletters, through this. You can see a newsletter by clicking on those links. Since we haven't, the latest newsletter has not been posted, but you can see an online version of the past newsletters there. So, and the last thing is the About Us section, which has a little bio of me and my books and Martin. That's the guy who basically made this thing, and he's doing really interesting other work now. And these are people who've been involved in making this happen, including people who were in a class, an earlier class on the subject, pilot class, and then lists of books and references that are particularly influential in my thinking that went into this, including some of my own articles. So that is the website. So I'm going to stop the share, and we are together, and I am happy to take comments and questions now.
That was fabulous, Tom. And under an hour from when you started and finished, so congratulations. And I just want to say a couple things. I look at this whole effort, and as I start to think more in the wise democracy pattern language vocabulary, to me there was a universal intelligence that last May of 2016 had Martin pick up the phone or email Tom and say, let's do a wise democracy pattern language. And these two people, totally on their own, totally volunteer effort, have put together this, to me, amazing tool that the timing, it couldn't be better. You know, particularly in the post-November timeframe here in the States, to know that the need for this kind of tool and to have it showing up at this time is part of that. And I think about well-utilized life force, life energy with Tom and Martin, and with the core of Andy and Susan and Charles and some other of us who are, I mean, we're doing this not because we know what we're doing or that we're getting a financial remuneration for it, because we're not, but it's part of our life energy and the system thinking that's involved with it. The universal intelligence, and Tom showed that list at the end of all these. I've been following Tom for only 19 years, and one thing I love about his work is it's so inclusive of all these different theories and people, and one of the things he loves is giving credit for it, and it's just amazing. And the openness to diversity and disturbance creatively is one thing that the community of practice is so important to us, because Tom's mind is really eclectic, but it is so far mostly a reflection of that mind, and we want it to be the wisdom of many more of us. And another thing I always am impressed by Tom is his commitment and his drive to be open and to include all of that. So with that, let's open it up for any other questions or comments or suggestions people have. And possibility thinking is the other one, our possibility thinking.